22, which is out of the Resource Management Agency with Mr. Brent Barnes.
Try that again. Good afternoon, board members. In our last episode, the board had several comments about the affordable housing ordinance that they had requested staff to address. We provided, as requested by the board, a red line version, a track changes version of the ordinance in your packet, and I'll outline the changes that we've made for you. The first was a comment about residency requirements. The board had suggested that priority be given to residents and workers of San Benito County. In the ordinance as presented last time, in the objective section at the beginning of the proposed ordinance, there's a following, what I've termed a polity statement in my my typo here. The Board of Supervisors further finds that an objective of this chapter is to provide housing opportunities for very low, and moderate income household members currently residing or working in San Benito County on a priority basis. Now, I'm not an attorney and I don't ever try to practice law, but I think that the council might advise that if there were a stronger representation of legislative intent than that in the ordinance itself, we might run afoul of EEO provisions. And so I would offer that as consideration of the board's intent. If you like, we can go back and try and rework that a bit more, but I think it makes it pretty clear what the intent of the ordinance is. I'd be happy to take questions. I have just 4 points here, and I'd be happy to take questions on any of them at any time.
Any questions at this time? Supervisor Dela Cruz.
Yes, thank you. What page are you at?
This is actually in the.
I'm looking at the revised.
Red line.
Oh, it's a red line. Let me go back. So it's okay. Hold on a minute. Red line. Give me the page number on the red line.
It would be on page 2.
Page 2. Benefit to the county? No.
Wait a minute. Sorry, I don't know it by heart. It should be on page 2.
Okay, I'm on page 2.
Oh no, I'm sorry. The very first one on page 1, subsection A of section 001 findings.
What does that mean? Will be given priority will be given to them.
Priority consideration would be given to such residents in.
Okay. So if somebody says no, we can't do it. Tough luck. I mean, Chispa, for example, if they get federal or home loans, there's some requirements and there are financial regulations that you can't have a preferential list.
Well, right. And that's where we run afoul of the equal opportunity. My take on this is if there are two identical candidates, for example.
Then we'll give it to the one that doesn't have.
Priority would go to the county resident or worker.
Okay. Would there be a check mark or somewhere that'll tell future planning commissions or board of supervisors that this one is can't do preferential treatment? I'm sorry, preferential
treatment.
Thank you. And would there be a checklist? Because it's very important that right off the bat that box is checked.
Sure.
I think maybe we would want to develop some sort of policy so it's a little bit clearer. Maybe there's something out there from a different county about whether or not there could be a residency requirement for eligibility in the program, like 6 months or whatever, a year or something, so that it's a bright line rule. Like if you qualify for the program, then rather than this something that's nebulous or too vague.
Sure. We can bake that into the implementing part of this. In
Okay.
other words, the forms would clearly have a checkbox, where do you
Okay.
live now, that kind of thing. And where have you lived for the past 6 months? So we can absolutely take that into
Well,
consideration.
I'm sorry, but I've been in enough situations where people have not actually been straightforward in where you've been for the last 6 months.
And this might be very difficult with the segment of the population that's rather mobile.
I think that needs.
I'm not
it
sure
needs
there's
more
an
work.
absolute answer to your question,
It
Supervisor.
needs more work. That's just. my opinion.
I'm sorry?
It just needs more work. It has to have more teeth to it.
Okay.
But if you're saying that if we develop the policy today, and then later on we can do administrative paperwork that
Tightens it
will
up.
work those things out, then
Mhm.
okay. So we'll put you on notice today that okay.
Works for me, absolutely. And we can bring the administrative side of this back to you as an advisory item if you like.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Any other questions on that first one? Okay. The Housing Advisory Committee, the board had asked that the membership of the Housing Advisory Committee be changed. And the response is the revised language on page 14 in section 21.03.011 specifies the makeup of the Housing Advisory Committee as 2 members of the board, 2 members of the Planning Commission, and 2 members from the affordable housing community.
Okay.
Questions there? Okay. Use of impact fees to offset reduced in lieu fees. This is one that the Planning Commission had requested consideration of the use of impact fees. You remember I discussed this a bit last time. This would be to backfill a reduction of in lieu fees, using impact fees to backfill the reduction of in lieu fees, 2 different flavors of money, under the provisions of 21.03.01 subsection G. Now, we looked at this a little bit more, and this would be very difficult to do in the ordinance itself, because the in lieu fees are collected for the express purpose of producing and supporting affordable housing, while the impact fees are conducted for a variety of other purposes: fire, traffic, parks and recreation, so on. And so it would be an administrative, I won't say nightmare, but bad dream perhaps, to try and figure out how to reflavor those monies. We recognize the intent of that the Planning Commission is after. Perhaps the way to deal with this is to have the Housing Advisory Committee provide an annual report with specific recommendations on this issue. Come back in 6 months or come back in a year and say, how is this working? Has it been a problem? And if there has been a problem, how can we address it after some experience in the field, so to speak? Questions or comments there?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, my concern right now is that in the next 6 months to a year, you're going to have a lot of applications being submitted for housing. I can't afford to test this if it works or not. I need to make sure that I'd rather side on the air of more money into the community for low-income housing than to say we just didn't meet our target numbers.
If I understand your comment, then you would be in favor of not reducing the impact fee, but keeping that
Yeah.
earmarked for housing.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Because there's going to on Southside Road and all these other places, there's going to be applications.
Yes, sir.
Any questions, comments?
Okay, and the last issue that was raised by the board was the affordable by design section, which is in 21.03.014. A new subsection has been added there that refers specifically back to 21.03.010, the long-term affordability issues and the consumer price indexed value increases, in other words, incremental increase over the years in accordance with the CPI, and the potential for physical improvements to the units, adding a bedroom or whatever that would increase the value. In other words, .010 is the section that deals with how those value increments are captured and or paid out to the residing family, the owning family. We think that it's adequate to refer back to that section and not repeat it in this last affordable by design section. I would be interested to know, I guess, if you feel that meets the requirements that you had.
Mr. Chair, if I could.
Supervisor Barrios?
Section, I'm sorry, could you clarify what section you were on?
This was section .014, the affordable by design, referring back to section .010.
Page 19 in the red line ordinance.
Okay.
Thank you. And then one last provision there, we have added a subsection, or changed the subsection A-5 in 010 to specifically require that the restrictions on resale be recorded with the title transfer, so future buyers, future owners are on notice that there is a restriction on the potential upside.
Supervisor Barrios had a
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is the only section that I got a call on, where
Okay.
somebody was really concerned.
That's good.
That is good. Where somebody was really concerned about why wouldn't, if they're building something affordable, why wouldn't it just fall under the other affordable sections rather than affordable by design? So I guess what I would need is clarification on what really makes this so different. I love the idea that there's more opportunity, choices, but is this going to be a loophole for developers to actually end up with not low income, but more moderate, and just low income will never be considered? So explain that a little bit
That's
to
a
me,
very
Brett.
good question. That's
It's just
a
very vague.
Good, very good
this
question.
is a very vague, kind of application within the ordinance.
Right. The affordable by design provisions have been the subject of a lot of discussion at the Planning Commission. There was, in fact, some of the affordable community members testified against that, saying exactly that sort of thing, that it tends to be a loophole, and it tends to produce lower quality housing perhaps than otherwise might be available. It could be taken care of under the other provisions. The subsection called other doesn't give any guidance whatsoever on what that would be. So it would be through an affordable housing agreement or a development agreement as set forth in this chapter, that those things would be worked out. It's certainly a possibility to do it that way.
Okay, now, it's also a possibility to just take it out altogether. I mean, if we're really doing this in the spirit of low income, very low income and moderate, and we really want to get that to happen, then, and that's not my idea. Supervisor De La Cruz thought, well, why not just take it out altogether? Well, I think that is a good idea, because then we don't have to worry about it. We had affordable by design, but that was the only thing that we had. Now that we have all these other things, maybe that can be wiped out. And then there's no question that what is going to be built will be affordable.
I would be in agreement with that, absolutely.
Supervisor De La Cruz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Supervisor Barrios. Thank you very much. I wholeheartedly support that we remove this, in fact, table this, approve the ordinance moving forward, but this right here, table to the side with the future discussion item, and go from there, because we really need to address the people that really want to help in our community.
Sure. This is obviously one of those things where we can come back in a year, 2 years, and if there's a hue and cry for affordable by design, and there's a way to make it work and put it back into the ordinance, we could do that.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything particular lost by leaving it out at this point.
Mr. Chair, that would be my compromise to my fellow supervisors and to you, Brent, is remove this affordable design and keep the rest.
Supervisor Botello, you look perplexed.
Yeah, I'm just, a couple of Sundays ago, I took a drive around the county with a large grower and looking at sites of where potentially farm worker housing could be developed. And whether it's modular homes, those trailer type of homes, trailer parks type of thing. And to me, that kind of registers as affordable by design. Do we have provisions in there that will allow, if finding a suitable area with resources available, could a person come in with an application if we took
Absolutely.
that out?
Absolutely, and in fact, we have several projects under consideration for farm worker housing.
Okay, well, then I don't have a problem with it. I just want to make sure we have all the, a number of
Right,
options.
that's my take too.
And in fact, there are, if I might, there are some very innovative, they sound really bizarre in some cases, but innovative design strategies. I talked with one developer who proposed bringing on shipping containers, retrofitting those for bunkhouse conditions, and cleaning them up, windows and doors and those kinds of things, and making them into stacked units. It may be a little hard to imagine, but it might very well work. I've seen them used as commercial space in other cities in Europe, but it can be very attractive, very interesting idea.
Any other questions?
Well, I guess just a comment. I too got a phone call on this particular subject, and I think I can support the idea that we go ahead and remove it now with the option of revisiting it if needs to be down the road. My only concern is it's not going to, if we try to look at it down the road, we're not going to cause ourselves a lot of heartache over CEQA, having to use, and that kind of stuff to bring it back in.
No, I can't imagine.
Pretty,
I can't imagine that including this provision would create a CEQA requirement or anything. It has no discernible effect. So.
all right.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, at this time, I think I'll open up for public comment.
I have Alfred Diaz-Infante.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I'm Alfred Diaz-Infante, Presidency of Chispa. Apologize I couldn't be here at your last meeting, but I did get the opportunity to listen to the discussion via live stream, so thanks for having that available. I want to thank Mr. Barnes and his staff for the changes that have been made to the ordinance. I've seen various iterations of the ordinance as it's been presented to the Planning Commission. There's a few items I want to point out, and that is in reference to page 12, where it talks about for sale inclusionary housing units, where it says the number and type of rental inclusionary housing and for sale units shall be determined for each application approval. Something that I'd like to suggest and what I've seen happen is that, and perhaps this is something that can be handled through the administrative manual, so when you get there, you may consider recommending that the very low and low income units be designated as rentals and the moderate as for sale units. That's the practice that I've seen in some of other local jurisdictions. Then the other thing, on page 13, where it references terms of affordability, it's clear to me that the for sale units have a term of affordability for 30 years. I wasn't sure where that language is or similar languages regarding the rentals and what the affordability term would be for the rentals. Then the other item which was discussed earlier, impact fees. I'm a little bit confused now, but I'll follow up with Mr. Barnes. But that does help. If there's a reduction in impact fees, that definitely helps in making the affordable housing more affordable. The impact fees in the county of San Benito are relatively high, so any help that can be provided is greatly appreciated. And then lastly, you've been discussing the affordable by design. The concern that some of the affordable housing advocates have had is that it doesn't provide for any kind of deed restrictions in terms of the term of affordability. I know that staff added to this section, the section 21.03.10 that references back to the section that talks about basically the term of affordability. But I think really that's the issue is if you have affordable by design, that can work, but if there isn't any set period of time that unit needs to be affordable, then you basically don't have an inventory that you're building up over the years. what I've seen happen in the city of Salinas, for example, they have both an inclusionary housing ordinance, then they have kind of what I would call something similar to this, which is affordability by design. They call it new urbanism. So what that means is that the developers have a required percentage of affordable housing, and they're also required to provide a mix of housing types. So they're not just all large, 2,000 or 25 square foot homes. They have to build at different densities, and that really helps to create more affordable housing. The units that are designed as affordable don't have any restrictions, but at least it's forcing the developer to provide more apartments, because that's what's lacking in major jurisdictions. More smaller homes, or even condominiums that, young families that are starting off, that they can afford to buy those homes as starter homes. Then lastly, I think in order for this to work, hopefully you agree that it's important for the city of Hollister to also have something similar. And we have had several meetings with Mayor Velasquez, and hopefully they're moving towards that direction to adopting their own inclusionary housing ordinance. And then to Supervisor Botella's comments about farm worker housing, it's something we've been working with over the years with the agriculture industry in Monterey County. I suggest or recommend that you look at the Tannemer and Antle farm worker housing. It's probably what I would call definitely the model, the best practices. You may be able to find something about that on the website of the Monterey Bay Economic Partnership. I believe at your last meeting you voted to be partners or be members of that organization. They're also promoting that. They're promoting advocating for affordable housing, but also advocating for employee housing. So that TNA model is exceptional. I mean, it looks really, really nice. I had a chance to take a tour of it. I'd suggest if you want to learn more about that, maybe contact Tannemer and Antle, and I'm sure they'll give you an opportunity to take a tour of that property. Thank you.
Thank you, Alfred.
Chair Scott Fuller from San Juan Oaks. I wasn't going to speak, but I have a question based on the board discussion about eliminating the affordable by design. I attended some of the planning commission meetings, and planning commissioners were quite interested in having some flexibility in this ordinance that would allow things like well-regulated secondary dwelling units to count as affordable housing, which other jurisdictions have done quite successfully. So if you eliminate, so my question maybe is for Mr. Barnes, through the chair, if you eliminate the affordable by design paragraph here, do you preclude things like secondary dwelling units being proposed as affordable housing? Or would that still be potentially allowable under the other category or whatever?
If I might, I think other is a little word that covers a lot of ground. Certainly second units are a recognized strategy across the nation, and that would be something we would, under the right circumstances, recommend here.
No, Mr. Chair, then I have a follow-up question. Then what you're saying is that those secondary units would not be excluded if we take out by design?
No, not at all.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments?
I do have, if I still have the floor, I'm sorry, Supervisor De La Cruz. There was reference to for sale units that did not does not specifically say apartments or duplexes or whatever, but I'm assuming that inclusionary units, if once they are approved as inclusionary units, whether they be a single home or an apartment, that would be included in the for sale. Is that right, Brent?
Yes.
So we don't, because we really are not specifying single-family dwellings here when we say
no.
for sale inclusionary units. It would encompass all of them.
That's correct. Once the unit enters the program, it would be in the development in the contract, not the
Doesn't
development
matter
contract.
what type of building it is. So, okay, thank you.
Actually, Mr. Chair, I was reading the definition and trying to make the dots connect.
Yeah.
So because it defines low income and low income, and the units could be in reference to a rental, if a project falls under this umbrella, then those units will be rented at that federal guideline of low income for the next, was it 30 years? 30 years, correct?
Yes.
So a developer who makes 20 low income apartments can't turn around and sell them in 2 years and say, I am no longer subject to this regulation. That regulation will stick to that project, right?
That is absolutely correct.
And what mechanisms do we have in place that will make sure that happens?
Well, there'll be a provision recorded on the deed.
Okay.
that
So it's
notifies
a form
other-
of a rent control concept, right, for those rentals?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
That works for me.
One other thing, if I might, I think it was Alfred, it referred to new urbanism. And that gets back to one of the other issues with affordable by design. Affordable by design, let me half a step back. I've done a lot of new urbanism, new urban communities in the East. And one of the key things that makes units affordable by design is the surrounding community. If you don't have to build a garage, for example, because you can go out and get on a bus or walk or bike to work or to the grocery store, huge savings. That's not really the condition that we have here, except in certain parts of Hollister itself. I don't envision that being the condition in the more outlying parts of the county unless we do a new community in the Bolsa or in the south of Ridgemark or Tres Pinos area, somewhere, a self-contained sort of place, a San Juan Oaks kind of thing. But even in those cases, we have to be very careful about the community context, and that's where the affordable by design comes in, not so much in the design or finishes of the unit itself. Okay?
I still want to entertain the public comment if there are any other speakers that, or any other members of the audience that wish to speak on this issue. Now's the time to do so. See none, I'll bring it back to the board for decision.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion.
If I could make two housekeeping
Sure.
issues. I'll just read the title of the ordinance for the record. An ordinance of the County of San Benito amending Chapter 21.03 of Title 21 of the San Benito County Code, and then parentheses, affordable housing regulations. And then on the motion, on number 4 of the motion, where it says retroactively order that a display ad regarding the proposed ordinance be published on, and I would ask that you add or after September 16th. So.
Okay. I'll make a motion to include our county council's language and remove the affordable by design section and approve as amended.
Is there a second?
I second.
Okay. Motion is second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, staff.
Wait. Can you please clarify that motion for a second?
Yeah, oh, yeah, the motion is to approve as amended through Brent and to include the language by Barbara and remove affordable by design concept off the,
So, per
Ordinance.
staff recommendation,
We're
and,
just going to make this reserved.
and to note that section 014, affordable by design, will just be changed to reserved. Reserved means that it's just being held open, that section, so we don't renumber the whole sections.
that what, say the what?
It will just,
Affordable by design.
it will just indicate reserved. That section is reserved for
That's okay.
future use.
That's all right, that's okay, that's all right, that's good.
And so this will be brought back at the next meeting for adoption. Yes.
October 11th.
Torres, yes.
All right. So moving on to item 23. This is out of the Health and Human Services Agency.
Good afternoon. I have Enrique here to help me. And all right, this is our monthly homeless services update. And I keep looking at this little thing here. I saw this in a state office that says, housing is not homeless. I thought that was kind of an interesting little sign that somebody had up in their office up there. So again, one to just remind you that the kind of the principles and values that we're working off of, that an individual's health is, greatly influenced by social and economic conditions, and that there's a growing interest in better coordinating health and human services programs in local communities. Housing First is a strategy that we've talked to you about since the beginning. It's a strategy that says that our focus should be on helping individuals quickly access and sustain permanent housing. And I thank you for the conversation you just had. That's very helpful and thoughtful. And it uses a focus strategy where we try to bring groups together, public and private groups together, to support those individuals so they can stay in their housing. I'm going to ask Enrique to give you a homeless service update here.
Thank you very much, Jim. Yeah. So we are due to begin our winter shelter program for homeless families. We're actually not due to begin. We're in the planning process with the start date of December the 1st, going through March the 31st. We intend to serve 30 families, and in total, in the past, we've averaged about 120 plus individuals, including family members and such. And we've been operating this program for 30 plus years at our department, Community Service Workforce Development, under HHSA. So that's due to start December the 1st. The 2016-17 warming shelter, we are in discussions with the Farm Labor Association, and right now the start date is the 3rd of December, going through the end of March. The next slide it talks a little bit more about this program, so I'll continue a little bit more information in a bit. The HUD Helping Hands program, this is a continuum of care, permanent supportive housing that we have with HUD. We are serving right now, we have 11 units, and they're all occupied. We received a little bit more money this year. We are in the process of identifying another unit. Because of the housing situation here, it is pretty difficult to secure another unit to lease to us. So once we do that, we will serve an extra family or an individual, depending on the size of the unit. The CalWorks Housing Support Program, it's a program that we receive from the state that's to serve only CalWorks clients who are homeless, families that are homeless. We kicked off this program earlier this year, and we continue to face the same type of issues as far as identifying housing. A family, once they're identified as eligible for this program because of their housing situation, they are assigned to a social worker whom then assists them in identifying a home, working out some of the details with the landlord, and providing the different support service. So for this one right now, we have 5 families that have been successful in locating housing and securing housing. And the way this program works, we assist with 6 months rent support, and at the same time try to assist them with job placement and other types of services. And we have funding to serve 16 families, so we're still on a mission to identify more families and secure housing. The Community Services Center, the 2014 CDBG grant, we're with a projected due date, and we've had some meetings with RMA for October or November of 2017 with a goal to kick off services next winter coming up. So we're still moving forward, coordinating some of the details with the state, with the paperwork and such, but we're moving forward with that. ESG, we received $190,000 from ESG, and $100,000 is earmarked for this winter's warming shelter, and the additional $90,000 is for rapid rehousing. And the general goal of this is, once you identify homeless individuals, to try to locate them into housing as quickly as possible. And the strategy that we applied for under these funds is rental assistance. So this program will pay for rental assistance for those that have been identified through this program. ESG is part of the continuum of care that we're part of, and it's state funding. So I believe we're going to face the same situation as far as housing and locating, but I think we've been successful and we will continue to march forward. The 2016 CDBG, as you are aware, we did submit a 2016 application. We hope to receive notice from the state the next month or two. We applied for $2 million, of which $1.5 million is earmarked for our second phase of the service center, and the rest for public services. So once that moves forward, we will proceed with that program. We also applied for an AHEAD grant, and we were denied. We applied for $50,000 to assist with construction rehab work of the service center. We didn't get it. We get some, and some we don't. We also applied for a CDBG over-the-counter grant. Again, for that one, we were denied. And our intent for this was to help with the service center with job training and such. So there's an application that was also submitted in the amount of $80,000 for CMSP. That's a County Medical Services Program. And that one looks pretty promising. We hope to get a response in the next month or so. And that the intent of those funds is to assist with a warming shelter. The homeless census is not in here, but that's due in January, late January. We're going to do the homeless census for 2017, and that'll be good for 2 years. That is done every 2 years in full collaboration with community resources along with the continuum of care. And the next slide, let's see. So our goal is to bring this back to this board on the 25th for approval of the implementation of this year's warming shelter. And again, December 3rd through the end of March. And the program will be from 5 to 8 a.m. During this time, we will provide security from the opening till the end, like we did last year. We will have full security measures enforced at all the times, like we did last year as well. We will have same type of setup as last year. We had 10 rooms, 4 beds per room for total capacity of 40 on any given night. They'll be provided 3 meals, again, with dinner and breakfast and lunch, packed lunch sandwich. We will have a few pickup with transportation being provided. And then in the morning, they'll be dropped off at certain locations as well. If they have appointments, we will take them to their appointments. That's the type of support that we will provide. We will have some supportive services with, could be dental screenings, could be some workshops, and different types of services during the evenings. We'll have some guest speakers and just activities to try to provide services to this much needed population. Last year we had some very steep challenges with staffing. We have a base from last year. We had those, some will be coming back. So as soon as we get this approved, we hope just to push this forward and get staff and training and move things forward. Okay.
Okay. Any questions on that before we move forward?
Any questions?
Okay.
I guess, do you have a chance to hire some of the folks that worked last year back?
Yes.
That's good news. Then training's minimal, but and then the 2 grants that were denied, is that something that is a kind of lend itself to some issues when we do get the service center open?
The one grant, a head grant that was denied, doesn't really impact much. It was kind of, we were told that, you might as well apply for this. It's $50,000. If you get it, you can use it. If not, we'll figure out something else. The over-the-counter funds, denied, but they said, please come back and talk to us. We want to see if we can work with you on something in the future. so it isn't denied and the door is shut.
It's a denial based on because we don't have the service center up and running yet, or is it
No,
based
denial,
on?
I think, mostly based on what the state would view the technical elements of the application. So we're going to have our grant writer, Jose Vasquez, go back and talk with them about that, and I'll enter into those conversations. Over-the-counter funds are available at any given point in time. It's not that you have to wait to apply for them. You just have to kind of work things out with the state. So I think we just need to go back and work with them some more and see what we can do. We were really going to use that more for the kind of economic development part of this, and in terms of developing places where low-income and homeless people could actually get job training, kind of based upon the model of what we saw in Indianapolis, not necessarily recycling, but the model of bringing in homeless and people that are coming out of the jails to kind of get them trained and certified and moving into a job that will sustain them. So we're gonna keep working on that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, Jim, do you have any update on No Place Like Home?
No Place Like Home. I think it's later in here, but I can say that No Place Like Home passed, and the governor signed it, and now someplace in the bureaucracy of Sacramento, they're working on provisions for implementing it. We've been working with our state associations, particularly with the small counties, to see that, to try to influence the provisions that come out. But I think, the intent of it is to get money out into every community. We've been talking with CHSBA and CSDC, in terms of working on that. So as that rolls out, and once we get the kind of application, then we'll sit down and figure out what kind of application we need to put in.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay? Whole person care, we've talked to you about whole person care before. We were working on an application. We didn't put it in at the last minute. There's still $50 to $100 million left on the table. Department of Health Care Services has announced that there'll be a second round of funding, and they expect that application to be released in November 2016. We're actually working with, let's see if this next slide, yeah. So kind of the model that we had proposed and that we're going to continue to propose is this, individual assessments, multidisciplinary teams, following up with service. We've had conversation with the Department of Health Care Services and with Community Medical Services Program, CMSP, to try to put together a small county application so that a group of small counties, probably up to 30, could actually get together and put together a single application with a single model, and it could perhaps be administered through CMSP, who's been doing our medical services program for years, and have some good expertise in this area. So we're working on that. Those applications will be announced in November. We expect that they will need to be in by February, and they will be then awarded around April with a startup date of July 1st of next year. Economic development, this slide hasn't changed since last month. So we keep having discussions in our monthly planning meetings with the community groups about the fact that economic development is the whole part of a continuum of helping low-income people and homeless people begin to find employment to take care of themselves. And then low-income housing development, here's No Place Like Home again. You just went through a pretty significant discussion about that. And we're continuing to have conversations with the Housing Authority. In fact, we talked with Jenny Panetta, the Executive Director of the Housing Authority, yesterday about these three topics, and they are very open to us working with on those things. And so we're going to spend probably the next month or so working out the details and trying to bring back a proposal to the Board of Supervisors to consider. The self-help units in Southside, you guys talked about that a couple weeks ago. We're looking at the potential of available Hollister homes is in the broadest sense, meaning homes, apartments, et cetera, that might fit into a Section 8 voucher kind of approach. So we're having some conversations this week with an organization that has been reported to us that has some expertise in that area. And that is our update for this month. Any questions, comments, direction? Just go and do good? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. At this time, I'd like to open it up for public comment. Comments from the public. Thank you for the update, Jim. Okay, moving on to item 24. This is out of the County Administrative Office. Mr. Espinoza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you're aware from our last board meeting, we presented to you in department head announcements some issues that we had posting public notices with our local newspaper in general circulation. So we had mentioned that we'd be coming back to your board today. So we have Louis Valdez here. He's going to give you a presentation regarding possible options with regards to posting and there may be some other things that we may be able to look at. One in particular I wanted to highlight, and I'll go ahead and highlight it for you right now, is our actual legislative analyst, or one of our lobbyists that we've used in Sacramento, Matt Seiverling, has mentioned that there are other counties within the state of California that have had similar issues posting timely in the local newspaper, or not having newspapers being able to post them timely. So this may be something that we probably want to take a look at, or a closer look at this next year with regards to maybe teaming up with some other counties and getting this, looking at legislative way of addressing this. But Louis, you can go into this a little more. Louis?
Thank you. You have in front of you a copy of a couple of things. Number one is the Chapter 2-6 from the San Juan Bautista City Code regarding the posting of public notices. And then the second document you have attached to it is Government Code 6000 through 6008, which relates to newspapers of general circulation. So the issue before us today is regarding the posting of public notices, or I should say the publication of public notices in newspapers of general circulation. In San Benito County, we have one newspaper of general circulation, and that is the Freelance. And the question has come up time and again, is there any other newspaper like the Freelance in the county? And the answer is no. Now, as your board is aware, I brought to light issues with regard to the failure of the Freelance to publish some of the public notices that we had to have published, one for LAFCO, another one for the Planning Department. What was interesting, and the reason that I brought this copy of the San Juan Bautista Code to your attention, is because the city of San Juan Bautista obviously is in San Benito County, and they have their own ordinance that allows for the posting of public notices in 3 separate physical locations. And so the question arose after I happened to look in the Freelance. There was a newspaper, I should say, public notice for the city of Gilroy in the Freelance. So it stands to reason that since the Freelance also owns another publication, I believe the Gilroy Dispatch, that sometimes they transpose and put both notices in the paper. Well, the curiosity got the best of me, and I called the city clerk in Gilroy. Turns out that the current city clerk in the city of Gilroy, her name is Shauna Friel, the former city clerk for the city of San Juan Bautista. And I asked her, actually Barbara and I called over there, Barbara Thompson, the assistant CAO and acting assistant county counsel. We called over there and we tried to speak to one of the deputy city attorneys that weren't available. I called Ms. Friel and she returned my phone call and informed me that she had been the city clerk in San Juan Bautista, and that 11 years ago, approximately 11 years ago, this particular section of the San Juan Bautista Code had been adopted by the city council in San Juan for precisely the same reason, because they don't technically have a newspaper of general circulation within the city limits of San Juan Bautista. The reason that's important is because part of the government code that refers or that establishes the criteria for newspapers of general circulation requires that one of the things to be met is to maintain the primary office where the newspaper is published. And when we send public notices to the freelance for publication, we actually send them to their office in Gilroy. We don't send them necessarily to the office here in Hollister. At least that's my understanding of it. They have an office here, but it's not exactly clear that their office is the primary office here in the city of Hollister, which if that were the case, then that would render us as a county that would not necessarily have a newspaper of general circulation. But that is an argument for a different day. The criteria that are spelled out here in this ordinance, we would like to ask the board to direct us to pursue as a legislative proposal that would apply only to San Benito County. That is, the manner in which the notices are posted in the city of San Juan, that criteria would be encapsulated, if you will, in state legislation that would be specific to San Benito County and would allow us to post public notices in 3 different locations if and when, as a backup, the newspapers don't publish our notices. As Mr. Espinosa has pointed out, there are other counties who have this problem, and actually the California City Clerks Association is looking to see if they can try and modify the legislation that applies to this particular requirement by providing for perhaps local blogs like Benito Link that has a large following to allow for the posting, if you will, online of public notices, or community newspapers like the Mission Village Voice in San Juan Bautista to publish those. I would like to point out that the Superior Court and the Assessor's Office has used, for example, the Mission Village Voice to publish certain public notices. That has not precluded them from doing so. I haven't really gotten into that, but the matter before you here today is this criteria that's spelled out in the ordinance from San Juan Bautista. We would like for the board to give us their blessing and their direction to pursue this as a legislative proposal that would be specific to San Juan Bautista, or to the county of San Benito. I'm sorry.
Are there any questions or comments?
So you're telling us is to go away from the old conventional way, which right now is the freelance, right?
I am saying that we are looking for an alternative.
Alternative.
Being able to post, that's exactly right, for an alternative, that we wouldn't necessarily be married to that requirement since it's the only paper. I mean, County Council and I have gone back and forth on this. We've tried to find adjoining counties in which to publish. We cannot, because the law does not provide for that. We've tried to figure out a way to post like they do in San Juan Bautista. We cannot do that either.
So, Lou, when we talk about publishing, we're talking about physically publishing in a paper.
That's right.
Or physically posting the notices at a location.
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
I mean, I don't know this, but electronically, the law doesn't specify whether it can be published electronically, does it?
The law specifies that publication is publication in a physical newspaper with ink and print. There are certain requirements that require you to publish and to post it online like we do with our agendas. But there's no alternative. If they don't publish our notice, we are out of luck. We have no alternative to do that.
Yeah, this has been a big deal to me in the fact that we have missed meetings that has harmed the public that were dependent on those meetings. It wastes staff time. It wastes the board's time, and commissions. It's expensive. The freelance has no regard for being 10 minutes late or making sure that we're well aware of filing deadlines. And I think it would be will make the freelance a far better paper if there's a little bit of competition in this. And this is tens of thousands of dollars that we're talking about. It's not nickels and dimes and a little inconvenience and some petty dispute here. This is a big deal, and I'm fully supportive of going forward with this and having some other options.
I'm 100% behind Supervisor Batalla. I'm just trying to be very careful here because never argue with the media because they can go after you by the ton of the ink, whereas me is just one person. I just want to make sure that if we do decide to go somewhere else, it is something that there's got to be some guidelines that we say, okay, this media, therefore, is neutral on articles, it doesn't have a hidden agenda, doesn't do all these things, and therefore, it's fair to distribute that information. I want to make sure we're not fueling the economies of a website or of media that says, now we got this guaranteed stream. If it's done in a regulated, unbiased way, then I'm happy. It's worth it. It adds protection and make sure that we don't cancel meetings that we should have had meetings. That's my only concern, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thank you for your concerns.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Supervisor Munzer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, Louis, I guess what I'm hearing, and I guess I want your clarification, is right now we only have the one option.
Yes, sir.
If our notice, for whatever reason, doesn't get printed in a timely manner, then we can go to option B, which is posting it in 3 other designated places. Out in front, the post office, wherever, the library. And so we're not going to, if for whatever reason we don't get our notice into the freelance in time, they don't print it in time, then we're not going to have to postpone a meeting or cancel a meeting because we'll have option B to go to.
Well, Supervisor Munzer, let's assume that we send a notice for publication. If it doesn't get published under the current statutory requirements,
right,
we don't have an alternative.
Right.
What I would like to be able to do is to be able to send that notice to the freelance, but at the same time also have the ability to post those notices in 3 separate locations simultaneously, so that if just in case it doesn't get posted,
so you're going to do both.
Then we have the backup. Now, I think it would be a bit far to go to say we want to cut the freelance completely out. This is not an editorial dispute, okay?
No.
We certainly don't want to do that. The freelance is a very important part of the information that gets disseminated to the county residents. We fully acknowledge that. So we do, however, need a mechanism by which to ensure that if and when a notice needs to get published and it doesn't get published, that we took the alternative measure of posting it, or that we're not necessarily tied to having to use a freelance, so we can use another means by which to run that publication if, in case, that doesn't happen. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I think that also another alternative in lieu of posting would be to indicate that there will be a space on your county homepage for posting of legal notices, because as we move into a more technological era, it's easier for people to go on their phones and their computers just to pull up the public notice section than to even check the newspaper or go down and see the hard copy postings somewhere on a building. If we could just have a place where people would know that they could get the notices.
That's correct. So we're trying to address those issues by coming up with something that isn't going to necessarily move away from what's traditionally been understood, but by the same token, I think we have to acknowledge that technology has gotten us to a place where we need to kind of pursue that line and take those opportunities if we can.
Thank you, Louis. Got it. Thank you. Good idea.
Thank you.
Can we actually push it back one more day to Thursday now? So we don't have members of the audience coming on Tuesday board meeting looking at us, pissed off at us not having their agenda?
I'm sorry, push what back, sir?
Instead of releasing it on a Friday, why can't we release it on Thursday now?
Oh, you mean the agendas?
Yeah.
We can certainly work. That's a whole nother story, Mr. Electus. That's a whole nother story. I can tell you that we will strive to do that much earlier.
It's a good idea.
It's an excellent idea. I also want to state for the record that I did get phone calls from both the publisher and the owner of the freelance in the last few weeks. They were very conciliatory, and they did apologize for not publishing our notices. And there was some staff turnover there and some changes. So I do want to make sure that the board knows that they did reach back out to us, and they acknowledged the issues. So that being said, however, I still think we need to take some kind of a backup or come up with a backup measure to ensure that this happens when it needs to happen.
Just at, Mr. Chairman, just at lunchtime, I got my head chewed off because of LAFCO meeting being canceled. So, that's good to hear that they reached out. That's about time.
Okay. At this time, I'll open up to the public for questions or comments. Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board for a decision. It is a request for the direction from our board to seek options and to seek some relief by our state legislators.
That's
So
correct.
move.
Second, Mr. Chair.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you.
Thank you, Louis. Moving on to item 25. This is our clerk, auditor, and recorder, Mr. Joe Paul Gonzalez.
What constitutes compensation for the Board of Supervisors? There have been different payments that are in lieu of a benefit that that are allowed to department heads and to the rest of employees that the board has historically received. For example, in lieu of medical health care, those, that's $120 a month type of stipend if you don't receive health care. Some supervisors have received that in the past. And while it's really a very technical point, it's one that I wish to have clarified in the ordinance that the board is in fact eligible for this special compensation, even though it's really in lieu of a benefit. And I propose to the county counsel's office and the administrative office to have that clarification made. And the only way to clarify it is to actually revise the ordinance. And I think it's it's just a fine point that in the event of an audit, the board has approved this as a special compensation that it would be allowable. Because as you know, the board's salary or compensation is governed by statute, and it must be specifically allowed in ordinance. So this revised this ordinance, proposed ordinance, will revise Ordinance 828 so that it shows that special compensation for the board will be equivalent to that received by the elected department heads.
At this time, I'd like to open up the public for comment.
Hand this in for me. Thank you very much. Marty Richmond from Hollister. Former Supervisor Pat Lowe sends her regrets that she couldn't stay for the afternoon meeting. She had an important appointment, and she asked me to carry the water bucket for her. So I will. These are her comments, not mine. So don't blame me. Let's see. She said, "Oh, strong letter to follow." No, she didn't say that. she said, her input to me was, she believes you deserve a raise. I'll stop right there. So while you absorb that, and as you probably can guess, she's concerned about the way this is worded and presented, in that the majority of the public won't understand what items might be involved. We had one explained. For instance, it was explained that if you don't take your health care benefit, you would receive a certain stipend in lieu of the health care benefit. She asked what else might be involved, and to make sure it was her request that those be, basically the major ones be gone over so that the public understands what is involved here. In other words, does this include in lieu payment for transportation? She brought that up, and whatever else there is. There may be nothing else. I have no idea. I tried to figure it out after she mentioned it. I tried to read the document and figure it out, but it all falls under this special compensation or whatever it's called, and I couldn't quite get to the base document. So her input was that she would ask that you explain so the public is well aware of I'm sure there's a list of things, and if you would just cover the main ones, then the public would get an idea of what's involved. But I'm sure you're happy to know she believes you deserve a raise. She did not ask for my vote on the question, but I do think you're undercompensated. I don't think anybody does this for the money, okay? And those are my words. They do it because they love to be aggravated, and you get your money's worth on that. Thank you.
Actually, that's a good question. I don't even know.
Well, as was explained to me, the ordinance becomes effective 60 days after the ordinance has been adopted. So that means that basically anything in the past, that this ordinance is effective from this day in the future, or from 60 days after adoption in the future. So at that point, the board is eligible for any items that may be in lieu of, for example, health care. An example would be like there was a payment that was made to every single employee to help with defraying the cost of health care. And so those were payments that were, considered for everyone. And the board was intended to also be participate in that, because the board also had a 22% increase in the health care costs. So these were the kinds of payments that is anticipated that the board would be eligible for. And that's why this specific ordinance was is being requested, because I want to make sure that the board is protected and that the public knows about that. There are special compensations that are in lieu of benefit payments. They're lump sum payments, by the way. That means they're not eligible for retirement calculations. So, just so the board is aware of that.
Mr. Chair?
Supervisor Barrios.
Thank you, Joe Paul, for bringing this up. And really, I think what former Supervisor Pat Lowe is looking for is transparency, which I think is a great, point. So with that being said, anything that happens from here on out that is special compensation of any kind or a one-time whatever, it will be understood that the Board of Supervisors falls into the elected officials, because we are elected officials. So it just puts us in the same bucket as everybody else, and it's transparent.
That's right. For example, elected department heads do not receive vacation or sick time, or that kind of compensation. The board wouldn't be eligible for it. It's because the election department heads do not. And so the elected department heads actually have the closest relationship to the elected board, because the same type of definition of being elected. So.
All right. And another request is, can you make sure that that race goes in before December 31st? That's a joke.
All right,
but
so-
thank you. I appreciate the transparency of it all.
So at this time, if there are any additional comments, questions, now's the time. If not,
Joe Paul, can you read the title of the ordinance into the record?
so I entertain a motion.
I certainly can. So let me get my glasses on.
Do you want me to? Yeah, I'll do it. An ordinance.
Sorry.
It's okay. An ordinance of the Board of Supervisors of the County of San Benito amending Ordinance 828, which establishes compensation for the Board of Supervisors of San Benito County.
I make a motion to approve ordinance number. We don't? Make a motion to accept, Mr. Chair. Introduction, wait for the reading. October 11th.
Second?
Okay, motion is second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Moving on to our final item of the day is item 26 out of the County Administrative Office. Mr. Valdez.
Good afternoon, members of the board. As you heard from a member of the public a few weeks ago, Ms. Marcy Houston, the issue with regard to the Garden Mart and the homeless individuals who have been congregating there was brought to the attention of the board. At the direction of the board and the CEO, I went out and many other individuals went out and took a look at that location, made contact with Ms. Houston, and we were directed to meet with her and to try and come up with some kind of a proposed solution. So before I get into that, I just want to point out a couple of things with regard to our approach as a jurisdiction. The city of Hollister obviously is within the county of San Benito. That's clear. The issue at hand, however, does not apply to a property that over which the county has jurisdiction. The Garden Mart business location, which is right on San Benito Street, very close by the administrative offices, is within wholly the city of Hollister, California. That being said, if there is a law enforcement action, and I want to make very clear that this particular issue has no relationship to law enforcement other than the fact that law enforcement has to respond when phone calls are placed and issues with regard to loitering are reported, then that becomes an issue with regard to San Benito County if and when any individual or groups of individuals are taken into custody. The board, I am sure, is aware that there is recent state legislation that has just been adopted. I believe it was SB 47.
Prop 47.
Prop 47, I apologize. Prop 47, that really speaks to the limited amounts of time that individuals can be held in custody if it is determined that that particular individual has some kind of a mental illness. In speaking with the sheriff's office, there is a limit of between 24 to 36 hours, 24 hours continuously or 36 hours total over the course of 3 days, that person can be held within the custody of the San Benito County Jail, after which they must be transported to an emergency room or to a medical provider that can provide them those services. So I just wanted to make really clear that with regard to the issues that have been raised that relate to law enforcement, this matter really is not a law enforcement matter whatsoever. It is a homeless services issue matter. And as you have seen from the Director of Health and Human Services, and as the board has been briefed before, measures are being taken right now to create a facility where those types of folks can be taken, services addressed and provided, and any other screenings can be effected. We did come up with a couple of options. The discussions that I had involved the county counsel's office and the auditor. I did reach out to the property owner of the location, I should say, of the property that is adjacent to the Garden Mart, which is where Ms. Marcy Houston has her business. And I did have discussions with some of the agencies who have been involved. And the best course of action would be to simply say that, well, I shouldn't say the best, but the best course of action that we could come up with in lieu of simply saying, well, it's strictly a matter for the city to worry about, is the alternative that we came up with was to work with the city of Hollister and come up with an amount of money that we would be able to provide Hollister to in turn address the issue that Ms. Houston has brought to our attention. My idea, quite frankly, after I reached out to the property owner and I spoke to the realtor, was to come up with a fence to put around the location there that hopefully would suffice in limiting the congregation of the folks who are around there. We can't do that directly as a county. We can do that in conjunction and in cooperation with the city of Hollister, but that's not, when you speak of jurisdictional issues, that is really not our jurisdiction to take any kind of affirmative action to do so. That being said, trying to be proactive and constructive and trying to come up with a responsive way to address the issue of the fence was floated, and I have not really spoken to folks over at the city of Hollister about it, but at least my preliminary indications are that that's not necessarily something that they would be in favor of. So I wanted to inform the board that we did take these actions and we did come up with this idea to try and address Ms. Houston's issue. But when it comes to jurisdiction and the mentions that have been made with regard to, well, this is really a city problem versus a county problem, it's really a community problem. But the course of action and the way forward is for us, really, the county, to try and work with the city to effectuate whether it's the fencing solution or some other kind of solution that is amenable to all the parties involved to try and bring resolution to the matter. The cost of a proposed fence would be minimal, quite minimal, but I don't know that that's an area that the board would want to go down at this time. So I wanted to bring that to the attention of the board and ask if there was any direction or further action that you might want for us to take in this regard.
Thank you for the update in the report, Louis. Any questions, comments at this time?
Mr. Chair, if I may?
Yeah.
Your board also gave specific direction to invite law enforcement, our sheriff's department, to this meeting to provide any feedback or any if you had any questions, they'd be able to answer them. And specifically with regards to jurisdiction as well as corrections, they would be able to highlight from the law enforcement side.
Right.
So they're here. They're present today.
They're here.
Yes. Thanks for being here, guys. Any questions or comments at this time from members of the board?
A comment, Mr. Chair, it's that it sounds to me like the property owner could construct or put up a fence. It's their property, provided that they get permission from the city. But we would have to pay for it as a county?
That's an option, it sounds like.
It is an option. The option, the idea was to, so the cost of a fence, Supervisor Barrios, would be $488 approximately for about 6 months total, okay?
So this would be a rented fence then?
This would be a fence that would be rented. You'd have a service that would come in. They would install the fence. They'd put it around the property adjacent to where Garden Mart is. Now, in having spoken with the realtor who represents the property owner who lives out of state, they're amenable. But they're also concerned because, number one, if they allow a fence to be put up around their property, then the next question that came up in discussions with them was, well, is there going to be a written agreement? Who will be liable if somebody jumps over the fence, breaks their legs, something happens within the property, within the inside area of where the fenced-off location is? It becomes a risk management question that, quite frankly, we're not necessarily prepared to address because it's so out of the ordinary. But that is an option.
Okay, now, is there an option to purchase the property from anybody? Is that property owner interested in selling?
The property is for sale, and I believe the price for the property is approximately $350,000. I'm sorry? I think they said $350,000. I could be mistaken, but okay, well, I believe it was $350,000. It may be 150, but my recollection is 350. I can call. I wasn't prepared to really speak to the issue of possibly purchasing the property.
Well, the only thing that I'm thinking of is that there has been discussion at the homeless planning meetings for the service center that a community garden would be really great in a raised bed area that could, and so I'm just thinking outside the box that maybe it could become a community project where the city, the county, the Health and Human Services, whatever, you know, would be able to contribute to make this the garden.
To that point, Supervisor Barrios, Ms. Houston has also joined that discussion, raised that possibility.
Well, she's the one that brought it up.
And
at
she's the one who
homeless-
brought it up.
yeah.
And she indicated that she may have some property where that could occur, but that would require transport and a slew of other issues involved. So, great idea. That's certainly another possibility. We did not necessarily research that too extensively because we wanted to take a short-term view of it and propose a short-term solution. But that's a great idea.
Anthony's first. Okay, sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Thank you for your questions. Supervisor Botello, I know you had a question, comment?
I just have a comment. I want to thank Mr. Valdez for taking as much effort and time on this issue, which it is a city issue apparently, and I kind of have some reservations. I thought the property owner was going to put the fence up at their expense to prevent liability on their, you know, in the core of the property and nuisances to their neighbor. But, you know, I don't know if we could be in a position to put up fences for private property in any case. I think it's bad precedence.
Mr. Botello, the property owner, to his great credit, and I spoke to the realtor, he has allowed for law enforcement. First of all, he has allowed for the posting, I should say he has affected the posting of loitering signs within his property. He has specifically given, I believe, law enforcement permission to go in there and enforce that particular provision. So the property owner has done what they can under the law to be proactive about that matter, short of putting up a fence. But I understand your concern. That's exactly the discussion that we had with county council.
Supervisor De La Cruz.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of there was a situation in Salinas where somebody got raped, and they sued Northwich because there wasn't enough lights there, and that was a private business. So I just wonder, because there's that risk involved, you know, one of these days somebody might actually sue that property owner. So maybe putting a fence will probably be in their best interest.
That's a very good question, Supervisor De La Cruz. The discussions that I had with council and the auditor was is the expenditure of public monies for a private entity in the public interest. That's a very good question. But I would say that...
Let me ask another question, Larry. Let's put that to the side. Let me ask another question. We pick up the homeless from that area, right?
No, sir. I would assume that law enforcement would pick up anybody who's taken into custody for the violation of any ordinance or, you know, state
No, but
law.
don't we take the homeless from there to the labor camp?
No, I think it's around the corner.
That's around the corner?
I don't know. I don't think that's something that, I don't think there's like a proactive effort for law enforcement to come by and say, we're going to take these people from point A to point B. Jen,
Maybe
do you
if
wanna
we are
address
picking
that?
them, maybe we can, through the, you know, to the Jim's department, you know,
We
pay for
do
the fence.
that during the winter warming program from December to March.
So we do that. We do pick them up there.
Well, in that vicinity, yes.
But don't we hold some inherent responsibility then, because we pick them up right there?
You'd have to ask county council that question.
And that, Mr. De La Cruz, was exactly the issue. Do we have any direct role in doing that?
Because if I'm the owner of that property, I'll fence that so you guys don't pick them up there. Okay.
Certainly, it's an option.
Are
Thank
there
you, Mr. Chair.
additional questions, comments, members of the board? This time, I'd like to open up for the public for comment.
Would you like
If
to
you
come
could
up?
come to the podium, please.
Why is it different for liability if there's a fence up than not a fence up? Because if he doesn't have a fence, there's a guy passed out over there right now. So why is the liability if the fence is up versus not a fence up?
Well, I'm not the director of risk management, but council, do you want to try and?
I'll just try to give if I mean, the owner of the fence company is the owner of the fence. And so they're going to have to make sure those fence doesn't fall over, for example, on somebody, that it's placed correctly. You know, whether it's, you know, doesn't intrude on the walkway, so somebody, you know, that's riding a bike, you know, hits it or something. I mean, I guess, you know, it's more complicated if you know, if you get involved with like third-party individuals, but perhaps people are concerned that it's creating, you know, that somehow you're, I mean, it's a very complicated subject, but there are potential liabilities when you take a step to try to, you know, you're adding a fence to, you know, you're getting involved in something that's, you know, that you're constructing that fence there. And so, I mean, I don't know that there's substantial risk, you know, that you fenced it off and you're responsible for the obligation, or, you know, the actions of a third party. But, you know, once the county gets involved, there's always the chance that the county's going to have some sort of litigation against it if something happened. And we can talk after, too.
Do I get 3 minutes now? Actually, I'm actually kind of grateful you guys even talked about this. Oh, I'm Marcy Houston.
Can you speak into the mic, please,
Sorry.
Mr. Chair? Is that okay if I requested that? Because I can't hear.
I'm sorry. So I'm grateful you even brought it up because the city hasn't done that. And I believe the city needs to be doing something about this because I am in the city limits. I think where the county also needs to take some sort of participation is because it's the sheriff, and the sheriff is county. And this is a serious problem. I don't want to keep telling you my stories, but I have a picture on my phone of a lady pooping. So I can go on with that if you want me to, and I don't want to. I want the problem to get resolved. It's blight. It's right on San Benito Street. I'm limited with my fence because of the property lines. I can't help it if that place is not for sale and that the guy lives in Idaho and doesn't have to see it. It seems to me local government would come in and tell these people, you got to clean up your mess. Because that's part of the problem why it's there is because it's not inhabited. You know, I at least have something on 2 lots so you don't have a problem with that you guys can see. So I'm hoping this discussion continues, and if I can do anything to bring, you know, the sheriff's never been on my property. I've called. The sheriff was supposed to meet with the police, did not, refused. David Westrick came over and gave me a few ideas on what to do. You heard your fire chief sit here and tell you he doesn't have any money. I mean, at least once a week, you got police, you've got ambulance, and you got fire engines on that property because somebody's passed out. Like I told you, when I left there, somebody was there. So how much money is it for all of that versus $400 every 6 months? And I don't buy the whole liability thing. I think that's somebody making stuff up. That's saying anybody who has a fence, anybody jumps over, then they're liable. So I would like to hope that, I mean, I've offered several times. I talked to Steve Sanders. Steve Sanders wanted to have everybody sit down. I talked to Candace. I've done everything I can from my little place. And now it's kind of up to the powers that be to take care of a problem, and it's a problem. And you guys can all run around and say it's not my problem, but it is your problem. You have an obligation, as does the city, to protect me as a business owner. I believe that. And everybody's ignoring it. And so now we're finally here discussing it, and it doesn't seem like, and yeah, I've been sitting here since 10 a.m., and we're nowhere. So can I get a commitment from somebody that this discussion won't end today, and that somebody will get the mayor on the phone or something and sit together? I didn't even know about the intergovernmental committee meeting. that was going on, and I'm way out here, and I get a phone call, Marcy, you're on the agenda. So can we not have this discussion end right here and come up with something?
Any other comments from members of the public?
I think the auditor would like to address the board.
Chair, Board of Supervisors. Mr. Valdez came to me and asked, what are the limitations concerning making payments? Like especially in this case, you know, to put up a fence on a private property. Well, it's pretty clear that this board is limited to expending funds on behalf of public purposes. So it's really considered a gift of public funds if it's expended for a private purpose. Now, if the city of Hollister had an ordinance whereby they can find that the property was a nuisance property, there was some public nuisance there, and they had an ordinance where they can go in and take care of that, like, you know, there was a building on San Benito Street that burnt down. It was a risk to, you know, public safety. The city went in and expended public funds to secure the property. Makes total sense. But they are obligated to ensure that those funds come back to the back to the public treasury. So as that property, you know, was sold or whatever, that has to be done. In this case, the county has no jurisdiction on that property. There is, you know, the county doesn't even have ordinances that deal with that particular property, could deal with that particular property. We just don't. If the boards chose to deal with this in a manner that is more consistent with public policy, you know, the homelessness issue and, you know, that kind of thing, it could work through the city of Hollister to deal with this problem. But to deal with it directly, I just don't see how the board could expend funds for that purpose.
Mr. Chair?
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Joe Paul, for that. I think your recommendation, and I agree with you. You know, Ms. Houston said she called the sheriff's department. Well, the sheriff's department shouldn't be going there. It should be the city police. And this is not to pass the buck, but we have certain jurisdiction that our sheriff is responsible for, and the city of Hollister is not their jurisdiction unless they are called in to incarcerate somebody. And even then, I'm not even sure they can come in. I think the police take them over there. But I would recommend that we do what we did with the river, is that we came together with the city and the county. It's a joint problem of homelessness, loitering, a safety issue, whatever that may be, and come up with a solution together. And that's really the only way that we can address this. Independently, we really can't do anything. But together, we may be able to have a plan. So may I recommend that the Intergovernmental Committee bring it up to that level and say, come on, guys, help us do something. And it's there. They should be the lead agency, and we support it.
Supervisor Patello?
Yeah, I'll bet $1 that Supervisor Munzer's agree with me on this one. I don't think the city wants to do anything about this particular problem. I don't think they're listening to Marcy. I don't think they have any motivation to work with the county right now on any issue. As much as time and effort that we've put into this, and we have been sincere about it. And we feel for your problem, but we're running out of avenues if the city doesn't want to deal with it themselves. And from everything I have witnessed at Intergovernmental, the city's not that interested in solving that particular issue at on San Marino Street.
It
So
has surfaced, Supervisor.
We'll bring it up again at intergovernmental and try to push the issue, but I'm not that optimistic that we're get anywhere.
There was a discussion already at intergovernmental about this issue.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, Supervisor Munzer.
So I believe I was the one that asked that this be agendized because it was said earlier, and it was repeated again by the earlier speaker, that the sheriff is doing nothing. And so I wanted clarification of what our responsibility as far as law enforcement is inside the city limits. So I believe Tony is here, and maybe he can address that for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Board. Tony LaMonica, Captain with San Benito County Sheriff's Office. And I'm here on behalf of the sheriff. And thank you, Louis, for all your work and for everything you guys have done for this situation. And Marcy, I am sorry to hear about what is going on with your business. And I do believe that the board has directed the county to work with the city. I know Sheriff Thompson has met with Chief Westrick and offered his assistance for whatever help he needs, because it is a city jurisdiction. Not that we're trying to pass it off on him, but it is. And our taxpayers pay us to work in the county, and that's what we do. We work in the county, and if the police department needs our help or assistance, we come in and do that. We operate a jail, and we have certain laws in the jail that we have to operate by, federal and state, and we also have to treat people with federal and state laws as they come into the jail. And that's how that is run. So I did want to let you know that the sheriff has been in contact with Chief Westrick and has offered our assistance. So,
Okay, any questions of Captain LaMonica? Hey, Marcy, if you'd like to address, you have to come back up to the podium.
I understand the sheriff. You don't call the sheriff in the city limits. That was never what I said. The problem is, and this is where I started in the beginning, before I even came in front of everybody, was the police arrests. The sheriff is the one responsible for putting them in jail. Candace is the one responsible for doing whatever Candace does, and then the judge is responsible for doing what he does. Well, the sheriff won't put him in jail, Candace won't prosecute, the judge won't hear the case because they're homeless people, so what are you going to do with them? So then I'm back to the police, who just have to keep showing up and removing them, and then they come right back. And so that's where Steve Sanders comes in, because he said he would be willing to meet with everyone to try to come up with a solution. And I'll be danged if nobody will come together. And I don't understand that. And I started this process in July. And Steve Sanders has still told me 3 times, I figure if you're going to go, you go to the top, right? And if everybody's blaming him. And he said he would sit in on the meetings with the police, with the sheriff, with the DA, with whoever to solve the problem. And so here we are 3 months later, and we've resolved nothing. So if you want all your resources to go to the police and the ambulance scraping people up off the ground, I can do that very easily for you, because I'm not getting any help. Either that or I just pick up my toys and go somewhere else. I mean, that's not a threat, but it's garbage back there. It is absolute garbage. And in my position where I am, I cannot do anything about it. So, I mean, who's ever seen the back of the fence line? He knows. Jaime. Nobody else has been out there to look at the back of the fence line. You have to, in order to stop the problem, you have to fence the access. And the access would be attaching a fence to my fence and running it down San Benito Street and up. It's the only way you can do it, because of the hill and the cement wall. It's a funky piece of property.
I got to ask this, Marcy. have you thought about maybe bringing some sort of action against your neighbor? If the nuisance is, to me, it appears to be between private property and between neighbors, and it's more of a civil thing than criminal or anything that the county is involved, since it is in the city.
So sue him?
Yeah. Not try and pass.
Let's sue the city too.
All right.
I mean,
I'll have to cut the discussion at this time. I know we had one more comment from the public.
We're all going to jail. We're all going to jail.
Marty Richmond, I understand your desire to help. I think this is one case where you'd be better off not helping and just give it to the city who has the responsibility. I think you just, I don't want to accuse you. I'm not saying it's any bad faith here. I just think it's just too many cooks in this particular case. I think you ought to just simplify it and give it to the city has responsibility. Listen, that's the North Gate, the so-called North Gateway to the city. Now, if the city doesn't care enough, and and I'm a city dweller and I'm on their side on 99% of the items, we all know that. But if they don't care enough to do anything about their own North Gateway, that they keep calling it the North Gateway, I don't know how you can call some empty lots a North Gateway. And someone finally comes and puts a business there, thank God. Did you remember what it looked like before there was that business there? But they don't want to do anything to offend somebody who owns a piece of open property they're never going to do anything with, because they're never going to pay to have it checked to see if it's on an earthquake fault. It'll just stay there forever, whoever owns it, have no plants for it. And we all know what the rules are, which is essentially is you can't lock someone up for being homeless. You can't lock them up for sleeping in the park, and you can't lock them up for living outside, and you can't lock them up for almost anything. And if you do lock them up, you got to let them go in 24 hours, or unless you put them into for a mental hold at the hospital for 72 hours, in which case you have to hire an ambulance to drive them to a mental hospital somewhere outside the county. So you've got $10 million involved before you can sign a document. So if the city doesn't care enough to do anything with it, in this particular case, you should just say, well, you guys don't care enough to do anything about it, that's it. And I understand Chief Westrick's problem, I understand the sheriff's problem, and they're stuck with the law like everybody else. And yes, the law unfortunately winds up hurting Ms. Houston, who's a local business owner and wants to just do the right thing, and says, well, I can make you come to the property every 15 minutes by picking up the phone. That's the system we live in. It stinks. Everybody knows it stinks, and why are we playing around with it? Just give it back to the city and say, God, it's your North Gateway. If you don't want to do anything to clean it up, if the city doesn't want to pay $488 every 6 months to put a fence up and sign a waiver for liability, I guess it's their problem. And, I'll be happy to point out the fact that the guy who owns that piece of property wants more money for that than they got for the 400 block downtown. Right. Of course, if he was selling it to anybody but the city, it'd probably be, I can say this, you can't say it. If he was selling to anybody in the city, he'd probably pay somebody $20,000 to take it off their hands. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Marty. I want to thank staff. I think that one of the first times Ms. Houston came here, I had told her that, we'd work with staff to do everything that we could legally, but I think that there comes a time when, we've got to pull back our resources. And I think that, we can certainly monitor the issue internally. And then we can, as public officials, we can work with our colleagues on the Hollister Council and encourage them to look into this issue. And I think that we can, through our intergovernmental, our committee, we can continue to monitor this issue and just encourage the city. And, we can certainly support them in any way that we can. But I think I want to, thank Louis. I want to thank the CIO for following up. Absolutely. Thank you. Okay, and so with that, I think that we will re-adjourn into closed session.